he obviously is deliberately copying every detail that he can copy of the John Everett Millais painting of 1861 too. But she's dressed in the same dress, there's going along a flowery bank, you see her moving along in the water for a bit, and you don't actually see her drowning, but that's the whole story of Ophelia. And so it's seen as a great purple patch, a great iconic moment in Shakespeare, a tribute to his verbal skill to be able to portray something that isn't actually shown. But you want to think about who Ophelia is. And something to say about that too, by this time a lot of women were writing about Ophelia. Charlotte Cushman, George Eliot weighs in on the subject. She becomes, the childhood of Shakespeare's heroines becomes an important topic of the period. And so Ophelia is given a childhood, or the whole story just becomes the pathetic, tear-jerking account of a young woman placed in a very fast and threatening world for her. See the play from her eyes and so on. Shakespeare not giving many roles to women in some of his plays, but in Hamlet at least we do get this wonderful, sensitive representation of the poor Ophelia. But of course, you see, part of my burden here is to say that that representation is really turning things around in the play to make it work for the 19th century. But this is what 19th century audiences want, which is an increasingly large number of women in audiences and women as readers and authors too, like George Eliot. This is what they wanted from Ophelia, was to see her as a pathetic, victimized, beautiful young woman suffering unjustly in a bad world. She almost takes over from Hamlet in terms of what's interesting in the play. Well, let me say a few words about the 20th century by way of conclusion here. Not surprisingly, as you move into the 20th century, and of course the beginning of film, the play becomes more angular. You return to a vision of the play as full of Hamlet himself is no longer the idealized, philosophical, romantic, lank young man of the romantic poets. He becomes more angular, more tough, more gruff, more angry with his world. There is one early account which is very interesting in terms of gender issues in the play, is the film, the German silent film in which, early 20th century, in which it turns out as the play goes on that Hamlet is really a woman. Now that's interesting itself, because by this time Ophelia had been, or not Ophelia, but Hamlet had been played by women, as in a breeches role. And that goes on through the 20th, into the 21st century. It's a great breeches role, of course. Well, in this film, Hamlet, we understand it as a woman whom her mother has disguised as a man to protect her against a threatening court and a very ambitious uncle. And so that's what keeps the story going for a while, until the very final scene when Hamlet is dying and in the arms of a grieving Horatio. And Horatio loosening the neckcloth and so on, for a dying friend and so on. All of a sudden, oops, out pops a breast. And the audience is to understand finally what the interpretation of the whole story was about. The whole secret is that Hamlet was really a woman. I don't want to insight into a new reading of Hamlet. Well, more, Glenda Jackson, for example, you get a woman who's very shrewish as Ophelia in the great Russian film, get my notes here. This is, let me get the date. This is 1964 of Kozintsev. This, of course, was one of the great heroes of the resistance to Stalinism, and the music by Shostakovich, and the image of the play very much, as Kozintsev talked about this, it's a castle which has iron portcullises that come clanging down. They're images of metal all through it. And Ophelia herself, played by Anastasia Venetskaya, is dressed in very tight corsets, very metallic corsets. So the whole images of oppression, of confinement, of lack of personal freedom, it's in some ways it's the most wonderful film there is, really, I think, of the play. There, then we, now another image too, one last important image I think of the story that gets thrown about a good bit has to do with Ophelia's graveyard. If the question of her suicide is problematic, or death is problematic, then the business of her burial that follows is a difficulty. The priest, you remember, says they've had to truncate the burial ceremony because it was doubtful about her death because of the suicide possibility, and so I guess she's going to be buried in sanctified ground, but with very abbreviated forms of the ceremony. Hamlet that bursts in upon him of the ceremony at that point to object to that and reveal himself. Well, it's the graveyard turns out, as you move on through the history of this play and production, to have been a favorite site for gorgeous scenery, to make the point of Ophelia's sad, painful death in the midst of scenic gorgeousness. Henry Irving did that. He spent tons of money on his productions in the late 19th century. So much so that someone said famously, Shakespeare was ruined financially for the theater. Often had casts of 50 or 100 so on stage. And with the graveyard, you could actually build a sort of ranked graveyard, so that sloping with graveyards, gravestones sticking up out of the ground and so on. And Ophelia is buried in the midst of that beauty. And that seems to inspire, among others, the scene in Franco Zeffirelli's film. That's the one with Mel Gibson as Hamlet, and Glenn Close's. I'm going to get my movies mixed up here in a moment. The point about the graveyard, Zeffirelli is known for physical gorgeousness in Romeo's Romeo and Juliet, for example. And in Hamlet, it's certainly whatever else, it's a very beautiful film. And the graveyard is a Scottish graveyard, rather steeply sloped with tombstones, so that one has a sense of beauty mocking the internment of this young woman. So then there's, I'm not sure I'm not leaving anything important out here. Yeah, Zeffirelli, this is Mel Gibson as Hamlet, right? And then that's the one with Glenn Close as the mother of the Queen, yes, and Alan Bates. That's interesting in terms of male-female relations in Hamlet, isn't it? I've never seen a production that matched that one for suggesting that Gertrude is really very much physically attracted, physically in love with her new husband. You have a whole range of choice, of course. This is a queen who could be doing this for more political reasons or personal safety. Who wants to be a dowager queen? It's a very powerless position to be in and so on. So you have a range of whole possibilities, but she plays it, having come out of her role of being a dangerous woman in earlier productions and so on, as someone who is really kind of dangerously physical and beautiful. And Alan Bates is ideal for a man to be opposite her, as a kind of a hunk and a teddy bear guy. So, and in that, then we have Kate Winslet as the Gertrude, as the Ophelia. So, no, she's in the Branagh film, right? So, what has modern production brought to the story of Ophelia and Son? Basically, much less sentimental, of course, than the 19th century reading of the character. Much more seeing Hamlet as heartbitten, restoring all the portions that had been removed from these earlier accounts of Hamlet's decided not to kill Claudius at prayer, Hamlet gladly going off and with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern and arranging for their deaths, or at least matter-of-factly not bothered by that. And his relationship to Ophelia, actually Mel Gibson is much faulted for that film, and it's obviously it's not the best Hamlet one could imagine. But his scene with Ophelia is actually quite good. He's when he breaks with her, when he turns.